She only asked one simple question. Can I go home early? She wasn't lazy. She wasn't careless. She was desperate. But the man behind the desk wasn't just her boss. He was a millionaire with a secret plan. Instead of a warning, he made her an offer. An offer that pulled her into a world of power, jealousy, and quiet danger. And by the time she realized what she had agreed to, walking away was no longer an option. Stay tuned because you are about to watch a beautiful story and find out what happened next. Hello family, welcome to Tales by King. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Grace Miller stared at her computer screen, but the numbers no longer made sense. Her eyes moved to the small clock at the corner of her monitor. 3:47 p.m. Her heart tightened. She had checked the time at least 5 times in the last 10 minutes. Not because she was lazy. Not because she wanted to escape work. But because her phone, hidden inside her bag, had been vibrating quietly all afternoon. Her mother had been sick for weeks. Very sick. That morning, the pain had been worse. Grace, her mother had whispered on the phone earlier, trying to sound strong. I think I need to see a doctor today. Grace had promised to come early. But promises were hard to keep when rent, food, and hospital bills depended on one job. She worked at Sterling Holdings, one of the biggest companies in the city. People dreamed of working there. But dreaming did not make the rules softer. Leaving early was not normal. Asking for favors was risky. Grace had never done it before. She was known as the quiet one. The woman who arrived early, left late, and never complained. The woman who fixed errors without credit and stayed invisible. Her hands rested on the desk, slightly shaking. Just ask, she told herself. Just once. Across the office floor, behind thick glass walls, sat Daniel Sterling, the CEO. People whispered about him in low voices. Some said he was cold. Some said he had no heart. Others said he respected only results, not excuses. Grace stood up slowly. Every step toward his office felt heavy. Her shoes made soft sounds on the floor, but to her ears, they sounded loud. She stopped at his door. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Tired eyes, simple clothes, a woman carrying too much worry. She raised her hand and knocked. Come in, a calm voice said. Grace opened the door and stepped inside. The office was quiet, clean, powerful. Daniel Sterling sat behind a large desk, reading a document. He did not look up immediately. Yes, he said. Grace swallowed. Sir, I have a small request, she said carefully. Daniel lifted his eyes and looked at her fully now. Not angry, not kind, just observant. What is it? He asked. Grace clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking. May I go home early today? The words hung in the air. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. His eyes stayed on her face, as if trying to read something deeper than the words. Why? He asked. Grace felt her throat tighten. She could lie. Many people did. But lying had never been her strength. My mother is ill, she said honestly. She's in pain. I need to take her to the hospital. The room fell silent. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not rush her. He simply listened. Grace continued softly. I understand if it's not possible. I'll make up for the hours. I just needed to ask. Daniel stood up and walked slowly toward the window. He looked out at the city below, deep in thought. Grace waited, her heart beating fast. Finally, he turned back to her. I'll allow it, he said. Relief flooded her chest, but it lasted only a second. However, Daniel continued, his voice steady, there's a condition. Grace's breath caught. A condition? She asked quietly. Daniel looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, curious, serious, and thoughtful. Yes, he said. I'll let you go home early, but only if you agree to a deal. Grace stood frozen. She had come in expecting a yes or a no. She never expected an offer that sounded like it could change everything. And in that moment, Grace did not know it yet. But this simple request was about to open a door she never planned to walk through. Grace stood in front of Daniel's desk like her feet had turned to stone. A deal, she repeated, almost in a whisper. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He walked back to his chair and sat down slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully. Grace's mind raced. Is he angry? Am I in trouble? Is this how they punish people here? She tightened her fingers around each other until her knuckles turned pale. Daniel noticed. Relax, Grace, he said calmly. Grace blinked. He had called her by her name. Not Miss Miller. Not assistant. Not employee. Just Grace. I'm not trying to threaten you, Daniel continued. If you don't like my offer, you can refuse it. You won't lose your job. Grace let out a small breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Then what kind of deal is it? She asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes looked tired, like someone who carried pressure every day and never had a place to drop it. I have a dinner tonight, he said. A very important one. Grace nodded slowly. My investors are coming, Daniel continued. The people who fund part of this company. They want to believe my life is stable. They want to see a good image. Grace frowned a little. A good image? Daniel's jaw tightened for a moment, like he hated what he was about to say. They think a man who has no family, no partner, and no personal life is risky, he said. They think it means I'm careless or selfish. Grace stared at him, confused. But you run the company well, she said quietly. That should be enough. Daniel's lips lifted slightly, but it wasn't a smile. It was more like a sad, short reaction. You'd think so, he said. But powerful people always want more than results. They want a story, something they can trust. Grace shifted on her feet. She did not understand why this had anything to do with her leaving early. Then Daniel said the words that made her stomach twist. I need you to attend the dinner with me, he said. Grace's eyes widened. Me? Yes, Daniel said. As my date. Silence crashed into the room. Grace's heart started pounding so loudly, she felt like it could be heard. I don't think I'm the right person, she said quickly. Sir, I'm just a staff member. I don't even. Daniel raised his hand gently, stopping her. I know who you are, he said. I've watched you for months. Grace froze. Watched her? Daniel continued, not in a strange way. In a professional way. You're always early. You don't gossip. You don't beg for attention. You work hard even when no one is praising you. Grace swallowed hard. That's rare, he added. Grace's voice came out shaky. But why would you pick me? There are many women who would look more. Daniel shook his head. I don't need someone who looks perfect, he said. I need someone who feels real. Grace's face warmed with confusion and embarrassment. She took a small step back. Sir, I don't want trouble. I came here for my mother. I'm not trying to be involved in. I'm not asking you to marry me, Daniel said, firm but not harsh. It's one dinner. A few hours. That's all. Grace stared at him. And my mother? She asked softly. Daniel turned his computer screen slightly toward her and clicked something quickly. Then he picked up a notepad and wrote a few things down. I did a quick check, he said. Your mother's insurance doesn't cover everything. The bills are building. Grace's chest tightened. How did he know that? Before she could speak, Daniel slid the notepad toward her. It was a number. A large number. Grace's eyes widened again. That's too much, she whispered. I can't accept that. Daniel's voice became quieter. It's not free money. It's part of the deal. You give me your time tonight. I cover what you need for your mother. You get to leave early now, and you won't lose your pay. Grace's throat felt dry. Her mind screamed, this is wrong. This is dangerous. But another voice inside her whispered, your mother needs help. Today. Grace looked at Daniel carefully. His face did not look playful. He looked serious. Tired. Almost lonely. If I agree, Grace said slowly, what exactly do I have to do? Daniel answered clearly, like he didn't want confusion. You will come with me, he said. You will sit beside me. You will smile when spoken to. You will hold a normal conversation. If they ask how we met, you can say you met through work events. Nothing complicated. Grace's hands trembled again. And physical contact? She asked, her voice small. Daniel paused. Then his expression turned firm. No, he said. I won't touch you unless you want me to. This isn't about forcing you. It's about appearance. Grace nodded slowly, still unsure. And after tonight? She asked. After tonight, Daniel said, you go back to your normal life. The deal ends. No strings. Grace looked down at the number again. That amount could pay the hospital. It could buy her mother proper treatment. It could stop the fear that sat in Grace's chest every night. But it also felt like stepping into a world she didn't understand. She raised her eyes again. Why does it feel like you don't trust anyone else? She asked. Daniel's gaze tightened. Because I don't, he admitted. People around me smile, but they want something. They always want something. He paused, then added quietly. But you looked like the kind of person who would say no if something was wrong. Grace's lips parted slightly. She didn't know what to say. Her phone buzzed inside her bag again, as if reminding her that time was moving. Her mother was waiting. Grace took a deep breath. "Okay," she said, her voice still trembling. "I'll do it." Daniel's eyes stayed on her face, searching for doubt. "You're sure?" he asked. Grace nodded. "But I have conditions too," she said, gathering courage. Daniel looked slightly surprised. "Go on." Grace spoke carefully. "First, I must go to my mother right now," she said. "No delay." Daniel nodded once. "Second," Grace continued, "I will not be disrespected. Not by you, not by anyone at that dinner." Daniel's voice was calm and serious. "Agreed." "And third," Grace said, "if I feel uncomfortable, I can leave immediately." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Agreed." Grace exhaled. Daniel stood up and picked up his coat. "Go home," he said. "Take care of your mother. I'll send the money details to your account department today, and I'll pick you up at 7. Grace turned to leave, but her hand paused on the door handle. She looked back. "Sir, what should I wear?" she asked quietly. Daniel's expression softened just a little. "Something simple," he said. "Something that looks like you." Grace nodded and stepped out. As she walked back across the office floor, everything around her felt blurry. She had asked one small question, and now she was walking into a deal with the most powerful man in the company. Grace did not know what would happen at that dinner. She only knew one thing. Tonight was no longer just about leaving work early. Tonight could change her life forever. Grace stepped out of Sterling Holdings like she was walking out of one life and into another. The evening air hit her face, cool and sharp, but it did not calm her mind. Her thoughts were spinning too fast. A dinner. Investors. Daniel Sterling. A deal. She held her bag close to her chest as she hurried toward the bus stop. On the way, she checked her phone. Her mother had sent a short message. "I'm waiting, my dear. Take your time. God will help us." Grace's eyes stung. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm coming, Mom." Grace's apartment was small and quiet. The paint on the walls had faded. The sofa was old but clean. Everything showed a life built on careful budgeting and constant sacrifice. Her mother, Mrs. Evelyn Miller, sat on the couch with a blanket over her legs. Her face looked pale, and her eyes looked tired, but she still forced a gentle smile when Grace walked in. "Grace," she said softly, "you left early. Are you okay? Did they shout at you?" Grace shook her head quickly and knelt beside her mother. "No, Mom. Nobody shouted," she said, trying to sound normal. "How is your pain now?" Evelyn's hand moved slowly to her side. "It comes and goes," she said. "But I think we should see a doctor tonight. I don't want it to get worse." Grace nodded, trying not to show her fear. She helped her mother stand, took her bag, and guided her carefully outside. The hospital was not far, but even walking a few steps made Evelyn breathe slowly, as if each movement hurt. At the hospital, the waiting room was crowded. The smell of medicine filled the air. Grace held her mother's hand and tried to look calm. Hours passed. A nurse finally called Evelyn's name. Grace followed as they checked her mother's blood pressure, asked questions, and wrote notes. The doctor was kind but serious. "Her body is weak," the doctor said. "Stress and lack of proper treatment have made it worse. She needs tests and consistent medication." Grace's voice became small. "How much will it cost?" The doctor mentioned numbers that made Grace's stomach drop. Grace looked down at her shoes, feeling shame and helplessness rise inside her. Evelyn noticed and squeezed her hand. "Grace," her mother whispered, "please don't kill yourself with worry. I've lived my life. I'm fine." Grace shook her head quickly. "Don't say that, Mom," she said, her eyes filling. "You are not going anywhere." Evelyn gave a weak smile. "God will provide." Grace swallowed hard, because she knew God often provided through people, through doors that looked strange at first. And now, Grace understood why she had said yes to Daniel's deal. Not because she wanted luxury, but because she needed a miracle. Later, as Evelyn rested in the hospital room, Grace stepped into the hallway to breathe. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the company's finance office. "We have received an urgent payment request approved by the CEO for medical support. Please confirm account details." Grace stared at the screen. Her hands began to shake again. He really meant it. Daniel Sterling was not playing. Grace quickly sent her account details, her fingers trembling as she typed. Then another message came, this one from an unknown number. "This is Daniel. Are you all right? Is your mother stable?" Grace paused. She didn't expect him to care about details like that. She replied slowly. She is stable, sir. Thank you. A few seconds later. Good. I'll pick you up at 7 p.m. Be ready. We're something simple. And eat something before I come. I don't want you fainting at my table. Grace blinked. It was the first time someone powerful had spoken to her like she mattered. Not like a tool. Not like a worker. Like a person. Grace returned home after settling her mother with medication and promising to come back soon. She stood in front of her small mirror and looked at herself. What am I doing? She whispered. Then she remembered her mother's tired face. She opened her wardrobe. She did not have expensive clothes. No designer dresses. No glittering heels. But she had something else. She had neat, clean outfits. She chose a simple deep blue dress that fell below her knees. She ironed it carefully. She wore small earrings and flat shoes. She brushed her hair into a neat style and applied a little lip gloss, just enough to look fresh. When she finished, she looked different. Not like a rich woman, but like a woman who had dignity. She exhaled slowly. Just one night, she reminded herself. At exactly 7 p.m., a black luxury car stopped in front of her apartment building. Grace's heart jumped. She stepped outside, holding her bag tightly. The driver opened the door. Grace hesitated before entering. Then she heard Daniel's calm voice from inside. Grace. She turned and saw him. Daniel Sterling wore a perfectly fitted dark suit. His hair was neatly styled. His watch alone looked like it could pay Grace's rent for a year. Yet, his face looked unusually quiet. Not proud. Not arrogant. Just focused. When Grace entered the car, Daniel's eyes moved over her dress and her simple look. He paused. For a second, Grace worried. Maybe I look too plain. Maybe I'll embarrass him. But then Daniel spoke, and his voice held something she did not expect. You look beautiful, he said quietly. Grace blinked, surprised. No man had said that to her in a long time, especially not a man like him. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel nodded once, as if he was also surprised by his own words. Then the car began to move. The dinner, where Grace shocked everyone. The venue was a beautiful hotel with warm lights and soft music. Everything looked expensive, shiny floors, polite staff, rich guests with confident smiles. Grace's hands became cold as they stepped out. Daniel leaned closer and said quietly, Stay near me. If you feel uncomfortable, tell me. Grace nodded. Inside, people turned to look. Grace felt eyes on her like sharp needles. A tall man in a gray suit approached them. He smiled widely. Daniel Sterling, he said loudly. So you finally brought someone. Daniel's face stayed calm. Mr. Caldwell, he said, shaking his hand. Good to see you. Then Daniel placed his hand lightly behind Grace, not touching her, just guiding her politely. This is Grace, Daniel said. She's with me tonight. Grace forced a smile. Nice to meet you, she said. Mr. Caldwell's eyes moved over her, clearly judging. Grace, he repeated slowly. Interesting. What do you do? Grace knew the wrong answer could embarrass Daniel. She could lie and say she was a model, a businesswoman, anything. But Grace was not a liar. So she spoke with gentle confidence. I work at Sterling Holdings, she said. I'm part of the operations team. The man blinked. Clearly, he did not expect that. A few people nearby also turned, listening. Grace continued calmly. I enjoy my job. I like solving problems and making sure things run smoothly. The investor's smile tightened slightly, but Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, as if impressed. Throughout dinner, people tested her. They asked tricky questions. They talked about money, business, travel, luxury. Grace did not pretend. She answered honestly. She listened more than she spoke. She did not try to compete. And somehow, that made people respect her even more. One woman at the table, dressed in a sparkling gown, leaned closer and said with a sweet but fake voice, So Grace, how did you meet Daniel? Grace felt her stomach tighten, but she remembered the plan. She smiled gently. At a company event, she said simply. We spoke, and we kept talking. The woman tilted her head. And you're not intimidated by him? Grace looked at Daniel for a second, then looked back at the woman. No, Grace said calmly. I think he's human like everyone else. A small silence dropped. Then Mr. Caldwell laughed loudly. Well, he said, lifting his glass, that is the first time I have heard anyone describe Daniel Sterling as human. People laughed. Even Daniel's lips curved slightly. Not a full smile, but close. Grace noticed it, and for some reason, her heart shifted. Later, when the dinner ended, Grace and Daniel walked back to the car. The night air felt warmer now. Grace released a small breath. "I think I survived," she said softly. Daniel looked at her. "You did more than survive." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" she asked. Daniel's voice became quieter. "They expected you to be fake," he said. "To chase money. To act like you belonged to my world." He paused. "But you were just yourself." Grace looked down. "I was scared," she admitted. Daniel nodded. "I know." They entered the car. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the rich world behind them. The car moved smoothly through the city. Silence fell. Not awkward silence. Just quiet. Grace finally spoke. "Sir, why was tonight so important to you?" she asked gently. Daniel stared out the window for a moment. Then he answered, and his voice sounded honest. "Because I'm tired," he said. "Tired of people smiling at me while planning how to use me." Grace's chest tightened. Daniel continued. "Tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was standing beside me, not because of what I have, but because of who they are." Grace looked at him, surprised by his words. She did not know what to say. The car slowed as they reached her apartment. Daniel's voice became calm again, like he was pulling his emotions back. "Thank you, Grace," he said. "You kept your part of the deal." Grace nodded softly. "You kept yours too," she replied. Daniel hesitated, then said something that made Grace's heart beat faster. "This deal ends tonight," he said. "But—" He paused. His eyes held hers for a moment. "I don't want to go back to pretending tomorrow," he added quietly. "So, I hope we talk again." Grace's lips parted slightly, her breath caught. She nodded once slowly. "I hope so too," she whispered. Daniel nodded, as if satisfied. Grace stepped out of the car and watched it drive away. She stood there under the streetlight, holding her bag to her chest, her mind full of questions. She had walked into his world for one night, but something told her. Daniel Sterling had also stepped into hers, and neither of them would leave unchanged. She walked upstairs slowly, unlocked her door, and stepped into her small apartment. Everything looked the same, her old sofa, the small dining table, the thin curtains. But Grace felt different. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. Why did he choose me? Why did he sound lonely? And why do I care? Her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital nurse. "Your mother is resting. Her pain is calmer. You can visit in the morning." Grace closed her eyes and breathed out in relief. Then she checked her account balance, just to be sure. The money was there. Grace's throat tightened with emotion. Daniel had truly helped her mother. Not with promises, with action. And that made Grace even more confused. Because rich men were not supposed to be like that, at least not in the stories she had heard. The next day, Grace arrived at work early as usual. She tried to move like nothing had happened. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and began working. But she could feel eyes on her. Whispers. Small pauses in conversations. People were looking at her like she was suddenly a different person. Her friend from another department, Nina Hart, walked over quickly and sat on the edge of Grace's desk. Nina's eyes were wide. "Grace," Nina whispered, "tell me it's not true." Grace blinked. "What?" Nina leaned closer. "You and Mr. Sterling together at the Grand Astor Hotel last night?" Grace's face warmed instantly. "Nina, please," she said quietly. "It was complicated." Nina's mouth opened. "Complicated?" she repeated. "Grace, that dinner was full of investors. People with power. That's not where CEOs take complicated. That's where they take someone important." Grace looked down at her keyboard. "I didn't plan it," she said honestly. Nina studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Just be careful," she whispered. "People here don't like surprises." Before Grace could reply, Nina stood up and returned to her desk. Grace's stomach tightened. She knew Nina was right. Sterling Holdings looked beautiful from outside, but inside, it could be sharp and cold. Later that afternoon, an assistant walked up to Grace's desk. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you," the assistant said. Grace's heart jumped. She stood slowly, feeling nervous all over again. When she entered Daniel's office, he was on a call. He lifted one finger, asking her to wait. Grace stood quietly near the door. Daniel finished the call and put down his phone. Then he looked at her. For a second, he said nothing. His eyes moved over her face like he was checking something. Not her dress. Not her hair. Her mood. Her energy. "Are you okay?" he asked calmly. Grace blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes, sir," she replied. "My mother is better. Thank you." Daniel nodded slowly. I'm glad, he said. Then he added, people are talking. Grace's shoulders tensed. I know, she whispered. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Did anyone disrespect you? Grace hesitated. Not directly. Not openly. But whispers were also disrespect. Stares were also disrespect. Still, she didn't want to make a big issue. No, sir, she said softly. I can handle it. Daniel's gaze sharpened slightly. You shouldn't have to, he said. Grace held his eyes for a moment. Something in his voice made her feel safe and nervous at the same time. Daniel picked up a file from his desk. I called you in because I want you to help me with something, he said. Grace frowned slightly. Help you with what, sir? Daniel opened the file and slid it toward her. It was a report, one Grace had worked on weeks ago. Grace blinked in surprise. I thought this was finished, she said. Daniel nodded. It is. But I noticed something. Grace leaned closer, reading. He had written notes in the margins. Not harsh notes. Smart notes. Questions. Ideas. Grace's eyes widened. You read my report? She asked before she could stop herself. Daniel looked at her calmly. Yes. Grace felt embarrassed. But, you're the CEO, she whispered. You don't read my kind of work. Daniel's lips lifted slightly, almost amused. I read good work, he replied. And yours is good. Grace's chest warmed. No one had ever praised her like that, so directly, so simply. Daniel leaned forward. Grace, he said quietly, I want you to be in a meeting with me tomorrow morning. With the operations board. Grace froze. What? She asked. Daniel's voice stayed calm. You're going to present this report. Grace's hands began to shake again. Sir, I can't, she said quickly. Those people are senior. They'll listen, Daniel interrupted firmly. Because I'll be there. Grace's throat tightened. This was too much attention. Too fast. Daniel watched her panic and softened his tone. I'm not doing this to scare you, he said. I'm doing it because you deserve more than being ignored. Grace swallowed hard. Why? She asked again, her voice small. Daniel looked at her for a moment, and for the first time, he looked like a man who wanted to say something but didn't know how. Then he answered carefully. Because when I looked around that dinner table last night, he said quietly, you were the only person who wasn't performing. Grace stared at him. He continued, you didn't laugh too loud. You didn't pretend. You didn't flatter anyone. You were just steady. His voice became lower. And I realized something, he added. I don't want fake anymore. Not at work. Not in life. Grace felt her breath catch. Daniel was dangerously honest. An honesty like that could pull someone in. Grace looked away quickly, trying to protect herself. Sir, she said carefully, I appreciate your help. But last night was a deal. I don't want you to start treating me differently because of it. Daniel's face became serious. I'm not treating you differently because of a deal, he said. He paused, then added softly. I'm treating you differently because I finally saw you. Those words hit Grace like a quiet wave. Because Grace had spent years feeling unseen. At home, she was the provider. At work, she was the invisible worker. Always strong. Always quiet. Always forgotten. Now this man, this powerful man, was saying he saw her. Grace didn't know what to do with that. When Grace turned to leave, Daniel spoke again. Grace. She paused. Yes, sir? Daniel's voice was calm, but his eyes looked serious. Come with me for coffee after work, he said. Grace's heart jumped again. Sir, she began. It's not a deal, Daniel said quickly, almost as if he understood her fear. No money. No pretending. Just coffee. Grace stood still. Every part of her wanted to say no. Not because she didn't want it, but because she was afraid of wanting it. Afraid of hope. Afraid of falling into something and getting hurt. Still, she nodded slightly. Okay, she whispered. Coffee. Daniel nodded once. Good, he said softly. Grace walked out of his office, feeling like the air around her had changed. But the moment she stepped back onto the office floor, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Across the room, near the printers, stood Vanessa Blake, one of the most ambitious women in the company. Beautiful. Confident. Always dressed like she belonged beside a CEO. And she was staring at Grace. Not with curiosity. With cold anger. Vanessa walked slowly toward Grace, her heels clicking like warning sounds. She stopped directly in front of Grace and smiled. But the smile did not reach her eyes. So, Vanessa said sweetly, you're the new favorite. Grace felt her chest tighten. Vanessa leaned closer. Just so you know, she whispered, I've been in Daniel Sterling's world long before you. Grace didn't answer. Vanessa straightened and smiled again, still cold. Enjoy your little moment, she said softly. Because it won't last. Then she walked away, leaving Grace standing there, frozen. Grace's heart beat hard. Because she suddenly understood. This was no longer just about a dinner. This was no longer just about her mother's bills. Now, it was about power, jealousy, and a world that could crush a quiet woman if she wasn't careful. And Grace didn't know it yet. But Vanessa Blake was already planning her next move. Grace picked up her bag and returned to her desk, forcing her face to stay calm. She didn't want anyone to see fear on her. But her mind was not calm. What does Vanessa want? Why does she sound like she owns him? And why does my heart feel threatened? Grace tried to focus on her work, but the words on her screen blurred again. Later that evening, Grace stood up to make copies of a file. As she walked past the printers, she noticed something strange. People were looking at her. Not normal looks. Looks with surprise. Looks with quiet judgment. Grace's heart sank. A colleague she barely spoke to, Mark Dalton, cleared his throat and said, "Grace, have you seen the email?" Grace froze. What email? Mark looked uncomfortable. Someone sent something. To almost everyone. Grace's stomach turned. She rushed back to her desk, opened her inbox, and searched. Then she saw it. A message sent from an anonymous address. Be careful. The CEO's new girl is using sickness stories to get money and attention. Some people will do anything to climb. Grace's hands began to shake. Her eyes scanned the message again and again, hoping she had misread it. But the truth stayed. Someone was painting her as a liar, as a gold digger, as a desperate woman chasing power. Grace's throat tightened. She felt heat rise behind her eyes. She wanted to cry. But crying at her desk would be like feeding the wolves. She stood quickly, grabbed her bag, and walked fast toward the restroom. Once inside, she locked herself in a stall and pressed her hand over her mouth. Tears slipped out anyway. Not because she was weak, but because she was tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of being judged. Tired of being punished just for trying to survive. Her phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. "I'm downstairs. Are you ready for coffee?" Grace stared at it, blinking through tears. How can I sit and drink coffee like nothing is happening? She wiped her face with tissue, fixed her hair, and washed her hands. She stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red. Her face looked hurt. But she forced herself to stand straight. "I won't let them break me," she whispered. Then she walked out. Coffee that felt like safety. Daniel was waiting near the building entrance. When he saw Grace, he immediately noticed her face. His calm expression changed. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Grace tried to smile. "Nothing, sir." Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Grace, don't lie to me." Grace hesitated. Then she handed him her phone, showing him the email. Daniel's jaw tightened as he read. His eyes grew cold. "This is nonsense," he said. Grace pulled her phone back. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "People will believe what they want." Daniel looked at her, and his voice became lower. "It matters because it's about you," he said. Grace looked away. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think this is trouble?" he said. "Grace, you don't know what trouble looks like in my world." Then he paused, his tone changing. "But you shouldn't have to face it alone." Those words touched Grace more than she expected. They got into the car. Daniel didn't take her to a public cafe. He took her to a quiet, private place, a small rooftop lounge with soft lights and warm air. It was peaceful. No crowd. No gossip. Just silence and sky. They sat at a corner table. Grace held her cup, but her hands were still trembling slightly. Daniel watched her for a moment, then spoke. "Tell me the truth," he said softly. "Did you ask me for money?" Grace's eyes widened. "No," she said quickly. "I never asked. I only asked to go home early for my mother." Daniel nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why I respected you." Grace swallowed. "But now everyone thinks," her voice cracked. Daniel leaned forward. "Look at me," he said. Grace slowly raised her eyes. Daniel's voice was calm but strong. "Grace, I have met many women," he said. "Some wanted my name. Some wanted my money. Some wanted my attention." He paused. "But you didn't even try." Grace blinked, confused. Daniel continued. "You didn't flirt. You didn't chase. You didn't act like you deserved anything." His eyes held hers. "And that's exactly why you're different." Grace's heart pounded again. She didn't know if she should feel comforted or scared. because those words felt too close, too personal, too dangerous. The next morning, Grace came to work early again. She walked into the building and immediately felt it. The air, the whispering, the stares. Then she saw the second attack. On the notice board near the elevator, someone had pinned a printed photo from the dinner. It was Grace and Daniel entering the hotel. Under it, someone had written with a pen, "New CEO project." Grace felt her stomach drop. People were laughing softly as they walked past. Grace's hands turned into fists. Then she heard Vanessa's voice behind her. "You see," Vanessa said calmly. "Fame is sweet, but it burns." Grace turned around slowly. Vanessa stood with a lazy smile, looking pleased. Grace looked straight at her. "Why are you doing this?" Vanessa's smile did not fade. "Because you don't belong," she said softly. "You're a worker. You're a nobody." Grace's chest tightened, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "I may be a worker," Grace said, voice steady, "but I'm not a bad person." Vanessa leaned closer, her voice turning sharp. "You think being good will protect you," she whispered. "This company isn't a church, Grace. It's a battlefield." Grace's hands trembled again. Vanessa stepped back, fixing her hair like the conversation was nothing. "I'll give you advice," she said sweetly. "Walk away while you still can, or you'll leave crying." Then she walked away again. Grace stood there for a moment, shaking. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But then she remembered her mother's weak voice. Her mother depended on her. And Grace was tired of always running from people who thought she was small. So she walked to her desk and worked anyway. The next day, the operations board meeting came. Grace barely slept the night before. She had practiced her presentation again and again, but fear still sat inside her. She stood outside the meeting room holding her files, her palms sweaty. Then Daniel appeared beside her. He didn't touch her, but his presence felt like a shield. "You can do this," he said quietly. Grace looked at him. "What if they laugh at me?" Daniel's eyes were steady. "Then they laugh," he said. "And you still speak. You're not here to entertain them. You're here because you earned your seat." Grace swallowed and nodded. They entered. The room was filled with senior staff, men and women with hard eyes and expensive suits. Grace felt small. Then Daniel sat at the head of the table and said calmly, "Grace will present." Murmurs rose. Grace stood. Her voice trembled at first, but she forced herself to breathe. She explained the report clearly, step by step, simple and confident. As she spoke, something happened. People stopped whispering. They started listening. One man asked a difficult question. Grace answered calmly. Another asked for numbers. Grace provided them. By the end, the room was quiet. Then one board member nodded slowly. "This is solid work," he said. Grace's heart jumped. Daniel looked at her, and this time, he allowed a small, real smile. Not for the board. For her. Grace sat down, feeling her eyes sting again. This time from pride, not pain. The moment that changed the deal. After the meeting, Daniel walked with Grace down the hallway. "You were excellent," he said. Grace let out a shaky laugh. "I thought I would faint." Daniel looked at her with a calm warmth. "I didn't," he said. "I knew you would stand." Grace turned to him. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked again. Daniel stopped walking. So did Grace. The hallway was quiet. Daniel's voice became soft. "Because I see myself in you," he said. "Not the poor part. The lonely part." Grace's breath caught. Daniel continued. "When you're strong all the time, people think you don't need anything. So they use you. They forget you. They step on you." Grace's eyes filled with tears because he was describing her life too perfectly. Daniel looked at her carefully. "And I'm tired of living that way," he said. Grace whispered, "Daniel." It was the first time she called him by his name. Daniel's eyes flickered. Not with anger. With something deeper. Then, just as the moment grew warm, a voice broke it. "Daniel." "Vanessa." She walked toward them quickly, holding a file, pretending she had business. But her eyes were sharp. She looked at Grace with quiet hate. Then she turned to Daniel with a practiced smile. "Can we talk?" she asked sweetly. Daniel's face turned cold. "Not now," he said. Vanessa's smile became tight. "It's urgent," she insisted. Daniel didn't move. Then he said something that made Grace's heart jump. "Anything you need to say to me," Daniel said calmly, "you can say in front of Grace." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. Grace's breath caught. Vanessa forced a laugh. "Oh, Daniel, don't be silly." Daniel's voice stayed flat. "I'm not," he said. Vanessa's eyes moved to Grace again. And in that look, Grace saw it clearly. Vanessa was losing control, and she was not going to accept it quietly. That evening, Grace went to visit her mother at the hospital. Evelyn looked a little stronger. The treatment was helping. Grace sat beside her bed, holding her hand. "You look troubled," Evelyn said gently. Grace tried to smile. "It's nothing, Mom." Evelyn's eyes were soft but wise. "My daughter," she whispered, "when something good comes, don't reject it because you are scared." Grace's eyes filled. "What if it hurts me?" Grace asked. Evelyn squeezed her hand. "Then you will heal," she said. "But if you run from every good thing, you will live your whole life inside fear." Grace looked down and whispered, "I don't want to be inside fear anymore." That night, Grace lay in bed and thought deeply. Daniel was not like the others. He was kind but also powerful. And powerful worlds always came with storms. But Grace finally understood. She didn't need to be fearless. She just needed to be brave. The next morning, Grace arrived at work. She walked with her head up. When she entered the office, she noticed something surprising. The photo on the notice board was gone. The whispers were quieter. And Vanessa was nowhere around. Grace sat at her desk. A message popped on her screen. It was from Daniel. "Come to my office." Now, Grace stood up and walked to his office, her heart steady this time. When she entered, Daniel was standing by the window. He turned and looked at her. "Grace," he said quietly, "I handled the nonsense." Grace swallowed. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel took a slow breath. "Last time you walked into my office, you asked to go home early," he said. Grace nodded. Daniel's voice became soft. "That request started as a deal," he said. "But I don't want deals anymore." Grace's heart began to race again. Daniel stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "I want something real," he said. Grace stared at him, her eyes shining. "And I want to do it the right way," Daniel continued. "No hiding. No shame. No games." Grace's voice was small. "What are you saying?" Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "I'm saying," he said, "if you're willing, I want to court you properly." Grace's breath caught. Not because he was a CEO. Not because he was rich. But because for the first time in a long time, someone was choosing her with respect. Grace's lips trembled into a soft smile. "Yes," she whispered. And in that moment, Grace understood something clearly. She had asked to go home early. But she had walked into a love she never expected. A love that didn't start with romance. It started with kindness.